Thank you everyone for being here. My name's Rose. I curated this exhibition with support from the Arts Council and the very kind support from the Horse Hospital as well. And I just wanted to speak a little bit about how I came to curate this exhibition and what this evening is about. So a couple of years ago, everyone I knew started to read Elena Ferrante's book, My Brilliant Friend. And I had read her early novels many years before and had, as a young mum, not necessarily taken to them, partly because the way in which she described the relationship with the children didn't necessarily ring true for me. And actually, though I really enjoyed My Brilliant Friend and that series of novels, it's still the way she describes the relationship with the mother and child was not maybe my favourite parts. But one of the things that struck me about her was the assonance of her name with that of an older Italian writer whose writing I loved, Elsa Morante. And it was only 10 years later when I started reading up on Italian feminism, and in particular the Milan Women's Bookstore Collective, which I did with a group called the Feminist Duration Reading Group, which meets on a monthly basis in London, if any of you want to join it, that I realized that in selecting the pseudonym Elena Ferrante, the author had deliberately chosen the name for its assonant link with the older writer, and also, I think, as a way of making quiet reference to the collective. In the introduction to the collectively written book, Don't Think You Have Any Rights, the authors, a group of women who were part of the Milan Women's Bookstore Collective, write, "This book is about the need to make sense of, exalt, and represent in words and images the relationship of one woman to another." The book goes on to describe the way in which this group of women sought freedom for themselves as women, not through seeking equality with men, but by generating their own symbolic community. They write, "The gift of the written story, which connects thoughts and saves one from letting herself go, is an exquisite image of what we have tried to explain. That is, in women's struggle, the symbolic revolution, the representation of oneself and of one's fellow woman in relation to the world, is fundamental and must come first." Part of the appeal, it seemed to me, of the Neapolitan novels was the way in which Lenu and Lila live through each other. While men come and go, causing various degrees of destruction, the friendship between these two women remains the primary axis through which they mediate their lives. The intensity of their relationship is something I feel many women can relate to. Ferrante, however, is not describing a relationship of equals. We are constantly told how intelligent Lila is. Lenu is always catching up. But we can never be quite sure if this isn't just her imagination. We feel at all times that in becoming a writer, Lenu writes for Lila, or rather Lila of the imaginary. So echoes of this fiction, as well as clues to Ferrante's choice of name, can be read in the description of a true story of a friendship that the Milan Women's Bookstore Collective report. The philosopher Adriana Caravero describes this in her book Relating Narratives, which is the title of this exhibition, which I've stolen for the title of this exhibition. So I'm just going to read a little bit from that. So this is chapter 5, on the outskirts of Milan. We are in the 1970s, and the protagonists are two friends with assonant names, Emilia and Amalia. They attend, in Milan, La Scuola della 150 hours. So this was, just to let you know, these were 150-hour courses. They were adult education courses that were gained by the auto and steel workers' unions in 1973. The courses were then extended across the industrial sector and eventually to housewives. And what was significant about these courses is that the education they provided was not to improve the skill sets of the workers to make them better employees. The curriculum was designed by Marxist and leftist intellectuals that were chosen by the unions and the social movements. So that's just a little side. Now I'm going to go back to the Cavalero writing. So these Amelia and Amalia are attending this 150-hour course. The story which concerns them in the book as a report of Amalia after the premature death of her friend, who died at 53 years of age. Amelia, in the early days, was pretty boring. She went on telling her story umpteen times a day, says Amalia. The latter has the gift of being able to express things well, whether out loud or on paper, which the other lacks. In their exchange of these writing exercises, the gap became evident. When I let her read what I had written, continues Amalia, especially when I was talking about my hometown, about the farmers, and particularly about my life, she cried. She, too, needed to tell about her life, notes Amalia, in order to explain this weeping, but she wasn't able to connect any of it up, and so she let herself go. Amalia then decides to take an interesting initiative. I wrote the story of her life, because by then I knew it by heart, and she always carried it in her handbag and read it again and again, overcome by emotion. The first writes the story of the second because Amelia had continually recounted her story in the most disorganized way, showing her friend her stubborn desire for narration. The gift of the written story is precisely Amalia's response to this desire. Now Amelia can carry the text of her story with her and reread it continuously, moved every time by her own identity, made tangible by the tale. So this need for a tangible version of oneself is, I think, felt most urgently by women and girls. In a situation where most often the protagonist in novels and much of our culture is a man whose character with whom we are supposed to identify, it's hardly a surprise. The poet Adrienne Rich has also written about women's need for writing about women. She writes, "She goes to poetry or fiction, looking for her way of being in the world, since she too has been putting words and images together. She is looking eagerly for guides, maps, possibilities, and over in the word's masculine pervasive force of literature, she comes up against something that negates everything she is about. She meets the image of woman in books written by men." So in the spirit of looking for a way of being in the world, I'm very proud to introduce a series of readings from Alice Albinia, Sophie Collins, Emily Berry, and Nell Dunn. So we're going to have a series of readings. And just to say, sadly, Sophie couldn't join us because of the storms. So she's going to, we're going to play a recording on the screen from her, which she sent to us. And then we're going to go alphabetically with Alice Albinia coming next, then Emily Berry, and then Nell Dunn. And then after that, we're going to have a conversation with Joanna Biggs from Silver Press and everyone about people that we look to for guidance or people that we've been inspired by and the way that helps us position ourselves as women. So first we're going to have Sophie Collins on this screen.
Hi. I'm truly sad not to be able to be there in person today because I think it's going to be an exciting event. But I'm happy to be making this video and just hope that it might in some way be able to contribute towards the discussions that you guys have following the readings. It's been very difficult deciding what to read today because I think that the purpose of the event really speaks in quite a direct way to most, if not all, of my work. So that book, and also newer stuff that I've been writing. But I think I will read primarily newer work. as I say, it's like the books, very much intimately concerned with ways of reading existing writing by women, and also with examining critically how they have been read historically and still are, and also with actually thinking in quite direct ways about the actual psychology of the process of reading. And the two pieces that I'd like to start with before moving on to a short excerpt from Small White Monkeys, which is the Green Book on Shame, are two ekphrastic poems, because these, I suppose, again, in quite a literal sense, are readings of women's work, albeit visual work rather than text-based work. I find it interesting also that I've been so consistently commissioned to write in response to women's work. And the first piece I'd like to read is a piece that I was asked to write by Dundee Contemporary Arts, who had an exhibition of Eve Fowler's work. Eve Fowler, I guess, is already someone who is reading other women's work, because she is currently sort of taken up with creating work that uses phrases or short excerpts from Gertrude Stein's writing. So her work is mainly text installations and screen print paintings, these massive canvases in these kind of Californian colours, which is where Eve is based. So kind of like pinks fading into greens, pastel purples fading into yellows, and, you know, sort of fiery, pastel-y colours, which also, at the time I was writing, reminded me, which was Easter, very much put me in mind of kind of Easter imagery, and also for some reason of chemical processes. I don't think there's anything more you need to know about this piece other than there is a kind of incongruous chorus of parrots that appear in the second part. Also, the title is the same title as one of Eve Fowler's pieces, which in turn is a short piece of text taken from Gertrude Stein's Lifting Belly. I want to tell about fire. Her dreams aren't often about words, but there was this. A book cover that was a home on fire and with fire written on it, a twice-articulated prophecy whose message she nonetheless misunderstood or willfully misheard, as a child mishears distant instructions to quit play. A flame is a subjective aspect, its reach and colour varying from mind to mind. As such, fires are centres of misunderstanding, though parrots see it all. At the ceremony, she refused to maintain a safe distance. The fire was hot and red and green and pink and yellow and white. Her brown hair stuck to her face, which was pink too, wet and puffy, as she stoked tomes, watched their text shrink and bulge, still legible until the moment of its dissipation, its rising or atomization. She won't be told what she already knows, core of parrots. At Easter in northern Germany, large fires are lit at dusk as a matter of tradition. In Gress, a working mother calms her child by telling him the smoke above a neighbour's home is just the Easter bunny dying eggs, a complex process of micro-combustion, and afterwards they eat the ash. This second ekphrastic poem is a response to a retrospective of the work of Lee Bull that was on at the South Bank Centre, and perhaps still is. There are a lot of different facets to Lee Bull's work, and definitely to the exhibition at the Hayward, which sort of took place throughout the whole gallery, so over 3 floors. And Lee Bull is someone who I guess is really eclectic when it comes to picking up different mediums in her artwork. So there was video art, performance art, sculpture, paintings, drawings, technology, all sorts of different things. But I think what's interesting about ekphrastic work, of course poetry in general, but I think particularly ekphrastic work as a kind of assignment, is what it can tell you about your own mental state when viewing a particular work of art. And what was on my mind at the time I went to view Lee's artwork was a lot of health anxiety, which may have something to do with my age, sort of approaching 30, because a lot of my female friends have been having similar anxieties, and some of them have also been diagnosed with quite serious and sometimes even life-threatening illnesses, often repeatedly misdiagnosed, something that many of them attribute to their gender and their GPs sort of asking them as young women to downgrade their pain, because I guess they were perceived in some senses as being hyperbolic or hysterical. So when I walked into the Liebel exhibition, the first thing that struck me was the sort of the bodiliness of her work, which is really basic. I mean, that is a surface level interpretation, but nonetheless it is what grabbed me. There's sort of white androids hanging from the ceilings in a kind of crude female shape, some of them missing their limbs. There were much softer sculptures that looked sort of like tumours bursting out of guts or villi and intestines, just sort of these really grotesque bodily makings. And I think all of that went into the poem, which I'll read now. And it's called About the Body and Lightness. It all begins in the gut, where shards indigestible tear open the walls. When blood spills, there is no mess. There is no bodily mess, save in tumefactive sludge. I would like to doze off inside a gleaming basophil, regular vibrations relaxing proprioception as we glide past a fragment of bone sunk in plasma, the spectacle of lymphocytes, deeply staining, eccentric. A bunker, an event, dust, some neighbours. By now fish are deadly land animals, quadrupeds with colour-coded mating rituals. The tarry landscape is hostile to ungulates who develop subterranean features. Erection of countless town models. The dogged work of preservation supersedes embodiment. Men's corpses are embalmed, made up for display, while women who wish to live must gain the written endorsement of their male companions. Medical records, like mutating cells, are subject to damage, may be lost or copied twice. A lauded teacher of letters once made a drawing of a cephalopod for his students. Women, jabbing, he said, are more like this than men are, by which he meant to say, nothing happens to me. Octopuses eat their own limbs when chronically understimulated. What is frightening about this body is its judicial disregard. And I'll just finish quickly with a short excerpt from the end of this book, Small White Monkeys, which is, as some of you might know, a sort of exploration of shame in various different forms. So there are essays, poems, images throughout this. And I thought I would just read from the final section because it references specifically Italian feminists, which were mentioned in the event description for today. And I think it also deals directly through that image of the fire, of sort of women readdressing their own history. I think the only thing you really need to know about this excerpt, which will just be a short piece of prose, is that at the very beginning of this book, I sort of talk about the symptoms of post-traumatic stress as catalyzed by shame, as a kind of feeling of car sickness. So sort of talking about the dizziness and nausea that goes along with post-traumatic stress. The motion sickness comes and goes, but it no longer frightens me in quite the same way. Against the odds, I have found myself able to read, to write, to think, and a new vision, as compulsive, as fervid as the small white monkeys, has begun to affirm itself in my consciousness. A woman is in a house, in a living room. The house has low ceilings. It's dim inside. The woman hears a noise. She gets up from where she has been sitting, keeping her index finger in the book she has been reading so as not to lose her place. She carries the book with her in one hand as she walks through to the kitchen. As soon as she enters the small kitchen, she is met with the surprise of a bonfire in the back garden, which she can see through the wide window above the sink. She continues walking, stepping into the rectangular garden of indeterminate size. She pulls the book she is carrying towards herself, resting it on her chest, still with her finger in it. Still with her finger in it, she regards the other women in the garden. There are other women in the garden. The other women are all watching the bonfire. The bonfire is tall. It makes a racket. It whips up the air around it, tossing the women's hair about as though there were a fierce Arctic wind passing through. But the air beyond the fire's atmosphere is really very still. At first I think that the women surrounding the bonfire must be burning their books, are about to toss the paperbacks and cloth-bound volumes onto the bonfire, but this is not the case. They all rest the books on their chests, keeping their places with a finger, like the woman who has just left the house for the garden. They appear content to watch the fire, and are all very still. What is fueling the fire? Nothing. The fire fuels itself. The fire is the fuel. The fuel is anger, and the anger is personal, and it is cultural. An inheritance. I understand this better when I encounter an interview with Italian poet Anna Malfaera, in which she refers to the so-called lasting anger. She says, "What has been a stimulus is the conviction that women must wage two wars, the one to establish their own identity, and the one to assert themselves as producers of values in the present situation. Women's current self-analysis in all the countries of the world has an incalculable importance on every level. The so-called lasting anger still exists, perpetuates itself, and grows for those same reasons that give rise to it." In Poetic Artifice, Veronica Forrest Thompson relates a particular instance of Ted Hughes undermining Sylvia Plath's work via his own limited perspective. He says of Last Words in her book Crossing the Water, it is a poem which would have been safer said by a persona in some kind of play. Perhaps so, writes Forrest Thompson, if we are concerned with Sylvia Plath the individual, although the comment shows an inappropriate idea of a poet's relation to his poems, even as lyrical utterance. It demonstrates the notion that the woman who suffers cannot relieve her suffering by becoming the mind which creates. A woman who suffers can indeed relieve her suffering by becoming the mind which creates worlds, creates texts, creates herself, creates personal, private, public spaces, and, via the latter, other women. This is a final affirmation, then. A woman who suffers can relieve her suffering by becoming the mind which creates, and that is exactly what I believe we must do. Thanks.
I was going to say recent, but it came out about a year and a half ago, book is a sort of exploration of the death of my mother when I was small. So it's a conversation with a woman in that sense. I'm going to read some of the poems from that book, plus some newer poems. I'm just going to start with a very short one, which is, let me just find it. It's a cut up from a story that my mum wrote, a piece of writing. It's very short, so it's sort of like her words that I've made into something new. She had it all cut off. It was more suitable. If only I could see my mother. When it is dark, I can see only myself. She won't come. They can remove even this. Cut it off. When I was in the process of writing this book, I was commissioned to write some poems in response to an exhibition. I think it was called One Day Something Happens, Paintings of People, something like that. And it was a touring exhibition going around the country. And all the artworks were portraits of one kind or another. So we were invited, it was me and 3 other poets, to sort of just wander around the exhibition and respond to any particular works that kind of stuck out for us. And I responded to one painting by Rose Wiley, who I think is part of this exhibition as well, so I thought I'd read that one. And it's called the same as her painting, which is Girl on a Liner. Girl on a Liner. This is the body's way of handling emotion. I am dreaming a lot about voyages. Mostly, I can't remember them. There is something spilled in the background. They say it is a house. I wrote, nothing in the outside world is changed to ward off the catastrophe. I am in a beautiful place with birdsong and which smells of flowers, yet everything very skewed. I loved you, but not in a pure way. Something kitsch could break my heart so thoroughly. Why should it not? What do you want is not a simple question, I say again, or am I shouting? But you must know, they said, calmly and like a very light breeze. You must have some idea. What's that noise? I expect it's the sound of the train breaking down. Does crying age one? If so, I suppose I've become very old. In the dream there is something hard he is asking me, my father, but it's vague. I examine my face in the morning. It is only partly like hers. I watched the water pour out of my eyes. There was a feeling, but I wrote it down, and it ceased to be a feeling, became art. I am afraid of, they explained, might be better rendered as there is a fear of. Then I get confused, scared, looking at the shit-coloured night, and there's a curt wind at my back, and I'm crying again, crying with the relief of not being loved. Whatever it is will reveal itself, but I feel like that grubby place beneath the door handle, the place everyone touches as they leave. Sometimes the world goes very hard and cannot be got into. I slide off its surfaces, and I'm trying to take in air or trying not to. I cannot believe I would conceive of doing that to you. In the house, she is very plaintive and timid, bereft, and goes into a room off a long corridor, making mournful noises. I feel terrible. I'm standing on the edge of nothing with a handkerchief in a ball gown, and I'm waving goodbye to you all. And the next one is after an artist called Renee So, whose piece like immediately sort of stood out to me in the exhibition. It's like this kind of like knitted canvas with this sort of like, it's like very lurid, bright orange and kind of browns, and it has this like sort of strange beetle-like figure that sort of appears to be like tipped over in a sort of spillage of something. Something about it struck me as very kind of abject. It's sort of like the kind of artwork you sort of have a very strong reaction to, and you're not really sure whether it's a positive or a negative reaction, but the more I looked at it, the more kind of I loved it. So this poem is after that painting, which is called Drunken Bellarmine. In the spirit of affliction, I beheld two things, that shame is also revelry, and a body is a spillage or an addiction. I do not know if this thing belongs to me, tipped up set of weights that promises but never delivers equilibrium. I cannot make manifest this collection of feelings, but look at me. I want to be loved for the wrong reasons. I mean, I want to be hated for the right reasons. I have been lonely. Every time I say the word I am ashamed. When I say I want, I am triply ashamed. I want my shame to be a kind of proof that deduces the world, and that's the worst shame of all. I have been theatrical, entropic, parting with myself for company. This heart sore will not stop weeping, and look, the sky is sick, knitted too tightly. My face is up your sleeve like a card trick. Don't love me. I am guilty, fatalistic, and sticky round the mouth like a dirty baby. I am a shitting, leaking, bloody clump of cells, raw, murky, and fluorescent. You couldn't take it. So I'm going to read a couple of newer poems. This one is inspired by two female dogs, so I thought it would be sort of relevant in some way. They're two of my friends who are poets and artists, Heather Phillipson and Holly Pester, have dogs, very wonderful dogs. So this poem is sort of a homage to those dogs, Marge and Peg. It's called Dream of a Dog. My life and all your lives, she said sleepily, so soft now, like the neck of a sleeping dog. I reach out for it, lay my hand on it, as you have lain your hand on mine, on my life. I think it is called kindness, what you do to me, as the dog noses deeper into sleep, as she sighs the way a dreaming dog does. I wish my life was in your dream, dog. I think it is. And she turns onto her back so her stomach rises pale and softly furred. And your words are traveling through me, or no, they travel over me, the way a breeze makes fabric touch us, the fabric of half-drawn curtains billowing from an open window, say, as I pass and glance out on such a day, the dog whimpering softly in sleep, or of a shirt loose enough to rise apart from and then again get close up to the body. Perhaps it's that you say I should have faith, though that's not your word, in increments, while my shoes are nosing through leaves and the dog is alert or disappears, but she comes back. If I had a dog, she would be a kind of faith. I would lift her onto my shoulder, the points of her ears very elfin and her face serious, tilted to regard you. She would listen and run, and then from a distance up a slight incline, when I call her, look back, then run on. And I do believe in increments, as when the dog brings me, in her dream, pine cones, when she wriggles in my arms, her rib cage strung like an archer's bow, when her paws bend at the wrist in supplication. I do not see the slow wheels in my blood turning, but I ride them. I do not see what I know, and everything beneath that which I may come to know or may not. The slow, slow discernment of the deep layer, air bubbles rising from the dead zone, the dog in her dream, thaumaturgic on a hilltop, the soft tips of her ears in sleep, a slight sigh, all my life. There's a word at the end there, thaumaturgic, which means like causing miracles. This will be my final poem. It's called This Spirit She, and it's after a New Zealand singer-songwriter called Nadia Reid, only because I wrote the poem as I was sort of listening to a song of hers quite obsessively. This spirit, she came upon me as I slept. In such a way my life or yours could come to be so thoroughly owned. She was reckless. I knew she would make me run away with her. I said, "Spirit, slow down," but the spirit wanted to ride. "But I am so afraid," I said. "I have all this tenderness to impart. But the tenderness is not mine to give away." "But all your tenderness is your own tenderness," said the spirit. "It is not," I said. "Why then did you give it all away?" "I did not give it away." "Then it is yours to give away." The spirit riddled like this. If in her arms I read a story, if out of her arms I had the choice to write one, but I chose not because I did not know where I was going, because my path broke down and I had this choice, stay or split. If I knew that were I to split, one part of me would become a ghost, if I did not know yet which part, if the voice calling me out asked me to describe the splitting and I did, if I said it was like smoke spiraling outwards, it was like smoke lifting off me, taking on form and leaving me, if it was like a delicate girl I never met but dreamed of, if it was like the flags of my youth fluttering far out at sea, like breathing out a breath you will never take back in, but you know you can never take any breath back in. If I saw her outside of myself and mourned her like I have mourned no other loss, if I knew it was both a miracle and the most terrible tragedy to open up, release a flame, watch the flame go. Have you seen it? A flame that can ride water. She was my daughter, and if I could, I would send her to you. If I sent her to you, would you take her? Listen, I ran this out of me because I knew it would burn me down. My trainers press the ground and lift up again. I saw myself on my back in high grass in high summer with everything coming to me. How this ghost left me and printed a new person all over me. I could peel her off or live like this. I cried, one or both will destroy me. The spirit called it fate, but I knew it was just drama. I will never know why a good person must die. Fate does not exist, I said, but every door I opened showed yes, yes, yes. I shut each one and locked it, checked the locks 3 times, went back and checked them again, shook them to be sure, drew hearts round the keyholes so the spirit would know I loved her. It was never that I didn't love her. Thanks.
My name is Nell Dunn, and I was born in 1936, so I'm part of the Germaine Greer feminism, the kind of second wave. And in 1965, I wrote a book called Talking to Women, about chatting to my friends about what they expected out of their lives. And the exciting thing happened, which is Silver Press republished it this year, and it just seemed to me absolutely amazing that something that I wrote in 1965 should still be of interest. So I'm going to read 2 tiny bits from... Could I just ask for the mic to come a bit closer to you? Should I hold it, Rose?
No, that's what I will hold.
Is that better?
Much better, thank you very much.
Well, the first bit I'm going to read is chatting to Pauline Botti, who you may know is a painter, and she's got 2 paintings in the Tate, and she's dead. Nell, and what about mental confidence? Do you think there's a different thing from physical confidence? Pauline, oh yes, well I think they're all interrelated, but probably one of the reasons I married Clive was because he really was. This might be something in me too, because I'm very much inclined to play a role that someone sets for me, particularly when I first meet people. Clive, to accept me quite as a human being, you know, with a mind, and he accepted me intellectually, which men find very difficult. Nell, why? Men think of you as just a pretty girl, you mean? Pauline, no, they just find it embarrassing when you start talking about, I've met so many men who get slightly embarrassed. They're a bit square, probably. If you, well, for instance, you know there are lots of women who are intellectually cleverer than lots of men, but it's difficult for lots of men to ever accept this idea. And they often feel, well, anyway, I'm a man, and being a man is lots better than being a woman. That's Pauline. And this is Frances Chadwick, who's a sculptor. Pauline, but we were talking about feeling more confident and certainly a bit clearer by now, our mid-20s, about what one wants to do, having been through a gargantuan effort to decide and then reconcile it with being a woman. It is rather like being a Negro and having to get over the whole problem of being black before you can write about anything else. It's exactly like that. If you feel, as one is brought up to feel, a second-class citizen, inferior to a man in every way, encouraged to think of oneself as the object of a man's pursuit, and therefore with no vital life of your own, except to be buffers for the train. But having got through that, having discovered there were other things I wanted to do, discovered what they were, attempted to do them, and feeling I've got a foothold anyway, jealousy doesn't seem to affect me in the same way. I'm a person in my own right. So that's just 2 little bits of talking to women, and I don't really know what else to say.